Welcome back, everyone, to Merge Conflict, your weekly developer podcast, talking about sometimes things in development. Yeah, Frank was shaking his head if you're on YouTube. He's like, do we actually talk about software development or just what's in the news? I don't know. After 400 and what is this, 45 bajillion episodes? How many episodes is this? Too many.
Well, you are the official keeper of the numbers, so I will defer to you on this one, but I would say in the thousands.
449. 449. We're almost at 450. That's pretty good. Halfway to 900. If you look at it
Lightning
that
round
way.
coming up.
I have a mini lightning round for this. I have a elegant Costco Chianti from Italy. $8.99 at your local Costco. It's a Chianti Reserve. It's very, very good. Highly recommend. The Chianti
with a trademarked glass. Very nice.
Yes, from the Willamette Valley, Argyle. Yes, this was one where we went on a wine tasting over Thanksgiving. We drove down from Seattle down to the Willamette Valley, and we stopped at Argyle. And many wineries, when you do tastings, they make you buy the glass if you don't have one. And the Argyle glasses were very nice. And we bought one tasting, but they gave us 2 glasses. So that was a bonus. They didn't know. So that was really nice. A really nice Riedel. That's like up there.
Sometimes we're a development podcast, and sometimes we're a winery tour review podcast.
You see what's happening here? You see me just do that midair? Just really swirl and let it breathe. That's good. You can aggressively swirl the red wine, so it's very good. I've only had one glass, not even a glass, like a half a glass, Frank.
I can't even tell.
Okay. Let's get into the news.
The news is I updated a Net 3.0 library to .NET 9. Can you believe that?
Oh, how did that go?
It actually went incredibly smoothly.
Yeah.
Congrats to all the reverse compatibility people, because I didn't even realize it was a Net 3.0 library. And went to do development on it, and I'm like, wow, I don't think you can even download that anymore. So updated that puppy. You probably can. But through the magic of compatibility, I had a .NET 9 app referencing it through the Nuget, and it was fine. Whatever. It was all good. But when I wanted to do development on it, I bumped that baby up to .NET 9.
Nice.
It was also very cute because the project file had, like, I guess they must have changed the property name of enabling nullability. And I had this like old-fashioned property name in there. Anyway,
whoa,
library all updated.
Nice.
All null references fixed.
That's awesome.
And yeah, so that's funny. I know that's not what you wanted to talk about, but that was news for me. I was happy.
That's pretty good. I mean, I do think that there's a sort of like modernizing. You can modernize your app, like get it on the latest version. There's modernizing your app for like cloud deployment. And then also as library creators, it's sort of like modernizing the ecosystem in the way, right? Like how do you make sure like your extensions are ready for new versions of Visual Studio or VS Code? How do you make sure that your libraries are ready for new versions of .NET? And like you could have probably went in and just said like Net Core App 3.0 and changed it to like Net 8.0 or Net 9.0. And it would have worked, right? It would have just worked, right? But it sounds like you went down the progression path of modernizing your library to use modern C# and .NET features. Like how far down the rabbit hole did you go besides nullability, which is props on you. Not a super fun thing to go enable, but it sounds like you did it anyways.
Well, annoyingly, past Frank decided to turn warnings on as errors.
Ooh,
and I wanted to get
spicy.
And like once you have a library, you don't want to maintain the library. Ooh, did I say that out loud? What I just meant that I just want to like be able to push code and not deal with the NuGets and everything. So I got the CI/CD all set up. It's easy these days, easy peasy. But the moment I tried to like run anything, it just kept failing. So of course, got CI/CD working on my second attempt though. So bravo. But because I had warnings as errors, the C sharp language has progressed. In the README, I said this requires C sharp 8. Turns out we're on like C sharp 13 or something now.
It's true.
So bump that baby up, but that also enabled more warnings that turned into errors. But it's all good stuff, that we use C sharp because it's a tightly, it's got a compiler. That's why we use it. We want all that checking.
It's a compiled language. I've heard of those. I've heard of
Yeah.
those. Well, no, that's really cool because I'm always fearful on turning on nullability, even though I know it's the right thing to do and it's like very
Oh, it's
helpful,
the
especially
best. It's the
as a
best.
as a library creator. It's like really helpful, right? Because you can check all
Yeah.
those nasty little edge cases, and like often, sometimes for me, it's like link statements. It's like link queries where like things in the
Yeah.
link, not just the query, but the where and the selects and the complexity. Like you get these long sort of like conditions, and then you're not checking against null on anything,
Yeah.
and you don't even think about it. You're like, like it's never gonna be null. You know what I mean? But like it could be. Who knows, right?
Yeah.
You don't know what the person that is using your library is going to do. So I've been super finding that helpful as well in the nullability aspect. I do believe that this is my personal opinion, and I've had many conversations with community members, with team members, and probably with you. I believe that nullability is one of the most important features that we could standardize on as a .NET community to enable and to help developers build better apps and better libraries and have less errors and exceptions in our code. But I believe that it is not widely adopted or accepted
Is that right?
or properly advocated for, in my personal opinion. And being one of the team members on the .NET community team that does advocacy for .NET features, take a little bit of blame on that myself, right? But we do have like some great documentation. But I feel like Flutter, when Dart introduced nullability, they did a really like aggressive push. But I don't think nullability was really aggressively pushed. It's still subtly nodded upon, in my opinion. Now that's my James opinion over the years of nullability. I don't know what your thoughts are on those statements that I've just made.
Oh, I'm just all in on nullability checking. I every time I see a null reference exception, I just get angry, just viscerally angry,
Yeah.
because something should have caught that long before that it ever got to that point. That's like a proper failure for me. The other languages I use, Swift has nullability. Wow, James just got bigger.
You're welcome.
Uh, Python, believe it or not, Python has type checking,
Hmm.
and you can actually do null checking with all the types and stuff there too.
Wow.
What else? I don't know. I feel like every language has null checking. Oh, F sharp. I've just been doing F sharp programming. That language is super serious about null checking. So I feel like it's just how you program now.
Yeah.
Like, so turning it on in C sharp is just default for me. Like the language feels silly without it at this point. Isn't that funny? Like I'm sure you can rewind to episode maybe 100 or 200 where like maybe we're first getting into it, but now for me it feels like table stakes. Like I expect that out of a language.
I do think also, for at least for me, when I'm scaffolding different parts of my code, Copilot is creating code that's null checked
Null
already
check.
for
Yeah.
me. So it's like, okay, like if I
Look
see
at
what you're
that.
doing there. I see what you're doing there, Copilot. You're telling me how to
Yeah.
really do this correctly. Because additionally, it's like whether it be IntelliSense, IntelliCode, or Copilot, or any other AI generator, like what it gives me, I don't want to often go back and clean up the code, right? Give me that best practice code. And I feel like now, if I create any new project, the things are on by default almost everywhere. I think even in new .NET MAUI, .NET 9 projects, they're on by default in the application layer, which is cool. But going and updating my old libraries, it's like,
Yeah.
that was work, bro. I'm just saying that you put in hours. I don't know how big your library was, maybe it's 2 lines of code, but you put in time to go make it better.
Mhm.
Now, did you go through and use any like new like value tasks or new like IEnumerable async and like streaming APIs and records and what are those other things that are spans? Like how
Records.
deep down the .NET upgrade cycle did you go?
I'm ashamed to admit I did not use records, but You just made me think there's a perfect opportunity to write in the app or write in the library. So I should go further, for sure, because truth be told, I'm just not taking advantage of a lot of the new C Sharp 13 features. When I open the code in Writer, the right column is all yellow. It's just all yellow.
Yeah.
Here's 8 billion ways you can improve your code, and it's like it's a little overwhelming. So in the case of like super old code, like app code, I think I've said it on this podcast before, and I still adopt it. If I'm in an old file that hasn't been edited in a long time, I go ahead and turn on nullability, especially if the file's not too long. If
Mm,
it's a really big file, I think about it over a little bit. But if it's a short file, yeah, I turn it on because you can slowly build up your app to being null checked and all that kind of stuff. And I wish I was doing that with more C sharp features, but a lot of those are like convenience features when you're writing new code. Going
yeah.
back and retrofitting old code, there's just not too much benefit there unless you
Yeah.
just want to review that code and clean it up. Otherwise, like you're doing some other task, I don't see the benefit of changing old code, to be honest.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Is there a reason that you targeted only .NET 9, or did you multi-target? Like, did you take that into consideration? I mean, I'm all in on .NET 9, but as a
Yeah.
mobile developer, it makes sense because .NET 8 support for .NET MAUI, for example, is going to be done soon. So you just be on .NET 9 anyways. Like, make it happen.
Yeah, when you say .NET 9, like it means so many things now. So it means C Sharp 13 and the C Sharp 13 compiler. It means the .NET 9 SDK. It means targeting .NET 9. Um, so I did all those things. I updated my global whatever the heck and updated to .NET 9 to get the new SDK. But thankfully, with multi-targeting these days, you just slap in a net standard 2.0 in there, and that puppy outputs a net standard library
Mm,
because in my case, my code was so old. I
yeah.
was afraid who knows which old apps I have that reference it and then which way. So I thought the safest thing to do is throw out a net standard 2.0 library because even ancient Xamarin supports that. So,
Yeah.
it's pretty safe. That's kind of the beautiful state that we're in right now. So when I updated Net 9, I did bump the SDK. I wanted the SDK, but I did bump the version. I could have kept the version at 8 or something. But I figure if you're an app developer using .NET these days, bumping up from 8 to 9 is basically trivial. Like the reverse compatibility is good enough. Like it's less than a day project to do these minor. They're major version numbers, but they feel pretty minor because they don't hurt to do the update.
Yeah. I feel like it depends on the project and the scale. However, project and scale can also be simplified with using some more of the advanced features in .NET, like the directory.props or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Like you can almost a lift and ship and say, okay, instead of updating 20 different projects and all the different NuGet packages, here's my, all my global packages and my global settings or whatever. I don't know what they're called, but you know what
Yeah.
I mean? Now, I
Yeah.
do think that process could be better because I do feel like those files are magic in some way, but I do think the tooling is a lot better where it's like, okay, I'm updating your NuGets, I'm updating it in this
hmm
special global config, which is great. Um, which means
Plus,
like less files to update. Granted, you might need to update a few things here and there in your code, but I agree with you. Like a lot of people were asking me, like, "Oh, I updated my Maui apps to .NET 9," and no one's talking about. Everyone's still talking about main page, and they're not talking about the new Windows stuff. It's like, well, like, yeah, the main page is still there, but like, it just is exposed a different way. So like, it's hard for people to like go and retroactively update all the videos and all the training that's out there, but the main page is still there and it still compiles and it's fine, but it'll give you a warning, right? It's really
yeah.
when it like goes away fully that's there. But even that project, if you were to go remove all your main pages, that's a Control Shift F. You know what I mean? main window
Is
to
that
window.
pretty easy?
It
Yeah,
really it's window like you can basically say apt dot windows sub zero dot
yeah.
page or whatever. You know,
Yeah.
it's if you have an application that's simple, that's not doing multi-page pop-ups and different things
Mhm.
like that, which is again is like the vast majority, unless you're Fidelity or something building like the Fidelity Trader app or whatever, which is like all crazy. But if you're building an
Yeah.
iOS and Android app, you're probably okay. But I agree with you, like in the Blazor stuff, like there's all these new features, but also you just change 8 to 9, and it's probably gonna just kind of be
Yeah,
okay.
I didn't wanna make light of it. I get it. Like, maybe something crazy in Maui changed between the version that shipped with 8 and the version that shipped with 9. Like,
Yeah.
things happen. Weird stuff like that happens all the time. I'm in the wonderful state of my library has 0 dependencies.
Yeah.
So it's really just I'm shipping a bunch of code with, like, no dependency chain or anything, and that's why I can easily say, net standard 2.0 and feel comfortable putting net 9 as my target, because if someone is targeting net 8, they'll just import it as .NET standard, or
Yeah.
who
And then it'll
who knows
work.
how MS Build works these days. But you know, it'll get it.
It'll
It'll
get
get one
it'll
of
get
those
in there.
versions,
It'll get in there.
and
Yeah.
and that's why I don't worry, if someone is targeting net 8. They could still use the library. We are, thank God, in that wonderful state where it's pretty easy, if you have 0 dependencies, especially, to just ship some code.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I think that I like that approach with the net standard. And granted there's like not evolution in standard, but for your exact
No,
purpose, which is like,
it's
hey,
just old.
I want to support everything else. I'm not going to do net 8, net 7, net blah, blah, blah. Like
Yeah.
if it supports that, cool, you're good, right? Like
Yeah,
you're off to the races. I think that's a good smart idea to do. And I think
and
I do
I'm
that with Monkey Cache as well, if I recall.
and I think I remember I said something like that to a Microsoft person, and they're like, "I think we're supposed to target net standard 2.1 because it's cleaner or something with the net ecosystem." But you know what? It all works. Who
It all
cares?
works. Yeah, it'll work fine. I think, yeah, it's a thing too, is like you only really need to target the latest stuff. One, if your CID service is like going to be optimized for it. So for you, it's like, well, I want to standardize my CI/CDs pipelines on .NET 9. So like this is just going to be easier for me to
Hmm.
standardize across my repos. But there's no additional work for net standard, really. Like obviously, if you like have taking advantage of a new API or something you might have to
Yeah.
conditionally compile or whatever. But like honestly, it's probably minimal work. Or you might just have like a conditional compilation, which is the old version of the method and the new version of the method or whatever. But like beyond that, that helps you streamline your entire CI/CD pipeline. And then on your development machine, it simplifies it too, because now you don't need .NET 9, .NET 8,
Yeah.
.NET 7, .NET Framework install. You're like, I can just build this thing because net standard is just going to build.
And honestly, I don't think there's that huge of a user base for this library. Has in the thousands of NuGet
One user,
downloads.
Frank Kruger.
um, well, now you made me completely lose track of my thoughts there. Now I'm just thinking about download counts and all that kind of stuff. But if I do want to use like a new API and it says something like, you can't support this in net standard, this is way modern, dude, I'd be like, okay, so I'll find out what minimum version of .NET I actually need for that thing, if it's worth it, if I actually do want it. And if it's 6 or 7, it's going to be fine. 8 or
Yeah.
9. Um, I think they're pretty good about, like, if the C# language itself requires weird backwards compatibility stuff, I think it goes and gets them through NuGet. I don't want
Yeah.
to sound too oblivious here. I
Well,
used to
it's
know
like
how all this stuff works, but nowadays, like, man, that NuGet chain is so complicated.
you can have a net standard library that uses C#13 features,
Exactly.
but the person consuming your NuGet will need to also be using whatever version of C# that you're using features of, because it's a compiler thing.
Oh,
Well, actually, it
well,
depends.
I
Actually, that's wrong. That's wrong.
I think
I'm
they're more
wrong.
clever than that, honestly. I
It's
think that.
if
Sorry,
it's
go
if
ahead.
it's no, you're right. You're right, because if it is a if it's a C# feature that requires the runtime, which is extremely minimal,
Runtime. Yeah.
But if it's a compile feature, then actually it doesn't matter because it's a compiled DLL. So the amount of features that actually require compilation changes are very minimal.
Mm-hmm.
So probably then, yeah, you can use all the latest C#. And like for you as a developer, that just means you target .NET 9 and then it's going to set your CS project to use the latest C#. Yeah, it's actually really smart when I think about it. It's like you can actually
Yeah.
just say, hey, I'm going to target net 8, net 9, whatever, and just be like, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I have the C# compile that puppy down, and it doesn't matter because it's compiled already. Wow, it's fancy. It says
Yeah. I can
BCL,
feel
CLRs.
I can feel all the Microsoft people yelling at me because, like, yeah, net standard's old, but you know what? Everyone supports it, so it's
I, I
fine for
I
now.
used
As a baseline, it's fine.
I used to have this motto, which was if it compiles, you can ship it.
Yeah,
That's what if you can compile it, you can ship it because it's
yeah.
compiled. It's compiled, Frank.
And because it's a small user base, the
Yeah.
moment net standard doesn't work, I'll bump up the minimum version. No
Oof.
big deal.
Wow.
It just means installing 2 SDKs or something when yeah, whatever. I don't think it'll ever come to that. I think we're living in a pretty good world where they've made a lot of nougat magic work with missing assemblies and things like that. A lot
Yeah.
of patchwork.
Yeah. I think that it's fascinating too because like how many of the libraries extra libraries ship. So for example, ML.NET, Microsoft Extensions AI, Entity Framework Core, and even .NET Aspire is that they build against major LTS versions. So Entity Framework Core 9
Mm,
is built against .NET 8. Could also be built against .NET 9, but it also is basically just .NET 8.
interesting.
So it will support .NET 8 and .NET 9. So actually, .NET Aspire 9 also supports .NET 8 because it's built against .NET 8. Now, I
That's
think that you
interesting.
should multi-target and take advantage of the new features, but that's me in any library I create. I'm not like no shade on the engineering team because that is more work technically for them to do, but it just means that they're not then able to utilize underlying .NET 9, not necessarily improvements, but features, right? Because if you run a .NET 8 DLL, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, you import a .NET 8 DLL into your project, a NuGet package, you're built on .NET 9, everything is optimized running on .NET 9, right? So if they made
Yeah.
improvements into system HTTP, it's not like it's running on the .NET 8 version, even though it's compiled against it. It's running on the .NET 9 version, right?
Yeah. Yep. Every app kicks off with one. You got it. You got it. I mean, when you run the .NET command at the command line, it's running a very specific version of the SDK, and it's going to run your code with that version, no matter what SDK built that code. And that's why even the Net 3.0, Net Core 3.0 SDK I used originally to write this library, it came in just fine because, in the end, it's all just IL. The IL
Yeah.
hasn't changed at all. And so, yeah, .NET 9, if that's the runtime you're using, that's what's going to execute all the code and do all the fancy Ryujit stuff and all the runtime improvements that they've added.
And that is why in almost all instances that I can think of, APIs are additive or new and are not breaking
Yeah,
because that
never
would
break.
because never break an API. Miguel de Gaza says, "Don't break your user." Ding, there you go. But right, even you think about it, the reason your DLL could work and be built in that is because those APIs have been backwards compatible and like didn't break in what 6 years, 7 years.
Yeah.
That's pretty
Oh,
impressive, dude. That's pretty impressive.
and it's weird. I take the API compatibility pretty seriously too. Like, I wanted to make a new API public in it. That was one reason I wanted to update the library. There was a class in there I wanted to use, and it was private. I'm like, darn it, Frank. And so I wanted to make that public, but I was very careful about like keeping everything else about it very private. I even used internal. I hate to use internal, but I even
Mm,
used internal because I didn't want to expose too
yeah.
much of the API. Um, you just end up having to do a bunch of those like little changes like that whenever you get a chance to modify it. But it's got to be additive. So I wanted to add an overload of an API function that I could have used default arguments with. But in the past, I actually got bit in SQLite-NET library. Um, from a code perspective, the API didn't change. I added a parameter with a default. It should resolve. If you wrote any code, it should all resolve correctly. But through the craziness of some NuGet chain, there was a way to essentially get a newer version of my library, but be calling into the older functions. Now, all of a sudden, there's a missing method. It's not calling into the correct method. And this was all through a valid version chain. I honestly don't remember the details, but it was gross. And I learned basically binary compatibility is important, not just source code compatibility,
Mm,
when you're talking about being purely additive and not breaking anyone. And so I wanted to add some overloads, or what could have just been default arguments, but I added them as overloads because I literally did not want to remove the old API just in case someone had that crazy binary chain.
yeah, that makes sense. There is a lot of odd, um, if you are a library, which other libraries depend on,
Hmm.
right? Like the resolution through it can be funky, especially if one library is referencing different versions and maybe what someone just ingested into their application or into a specific library that they have a class library that has a version, but then yours, the other one has a different version. It's really chaotic in some ways, but for the greater good of things, I guess. So interesting things to think about in the migration. I'll say this: I am the worst. I break my libraries. I break all the time, and it's like the worst. I feel so bad because the underlying APIs are evolving and changing. Like especially in in-app
Hmm.
billing, like the in-app purchasing stuff, they're so different. And Google, just like changing stuff all the time, which really drives feature demand and other stuff to change the APIs. But I'm never in the mindset of creating that backwards compatibility layer. And what that does for me as a library creator is additional work because there's confusion when people upgrade. There's new issues that I need to triage. And then there's like dissatisfaction in the library
Hmm.
overall. So there's three
Yep.
things that are upsetting to folks. And it's a bummer because that's not the intention, right? It's like I'm trying to improve it, but because I didn't take the time to think about that layer or how it might impact older versions, I just say, suck it up. Like, it's going to happen. Let's go. But that's, it can be it can be right in some situations, but wrong in many other situations.
Yep.
Yep. And that's going to do it. There you go. Yep. Truth. That was a truth bomb. Just dropped it.
Well, it just maintaining any library is kind of hard. Like this library was 6 years old, 7 years old,
Mm-hmm.
very old, and but I liked it. Like I use it in a lot of my code, and it was just one of those libraries that I don't want to say like I nailed it the first time because what I really did was I copied someone else's code. So it was a port of someone else's code. So as long as I did the port all right and that code was half decent and I
Mm.
fixed all my bugs and that kind of stuff, I made a few small improvements here and there, but it was just like this old library that I could rely on. And honestly, I just would reference it over and over. And so going back and even touching it at all, I was just like, ooh, I'm nervous about this. What am I going to break? What's going to go wrong with
Yeah.
doing this? So, yeah. In the end, though, I opened this with I know this wasn't the direction you wanted to go with the show, but it was really positive news because everything we talked about, it all went really smoothly. It
Yeah.
was like 4 hours of work or something like that. And I got my features in, I got the NuGet updated, bumped up the version number, remembered. I even had to update the CI/CD from Bitrise. Remember them? We used to use
Yeah.
it all the time. Um, but it was all success. So I was
Beautiful.
afraid of it. Old code, but success.
Beautiful. I love it. All right. Well, that's going to do it for this week's Merge Conflict. Tune in to this week's Patreon exclusive. If you want to hear us talk about, we haven't recorded it yet. We're going to record it next. If you want to hear about Apple Invites, our thoughts, Apple Care Plus changes, and Nintendo Switch 2. So tune into that bonus exclusive Patreon at patreon.com/mergeconflict.fm. You can find that in the show notes below. Follow us on YouTube. You can see me drinking wine at youtube.com/@mergeconflict.fm. We are getting close to monetization one day. So give us the follows and the likes and the subscribes and the watch hours if you want to see these beautiful faces. And you can follow us. I don't know. None of us are on the internet, so you can basically just check out YouTube. You're on the
I'm
the
I'm
Twitter
still on the
X's.
X.coms.
I'm like, people think I'm there, but I'm not. I'm not
It's
anywhere. I'm
just
on
a
the
robot.
LinkedIn.
It's an AI.
It is an AI. I'm going to do a video that's called like how I quit social media, I think, and then talk about like where I act, because I'm there, but I'm not.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm having a lot of
You
conversations.
quiet quit
I
social networks.
I quietly quit. Ooh, that's a good YouTube. Quietly quitting social media. That's good. I'm gonna do that. Be on the lookout at my YouTube, youtube.com/James Montemagno. That's me. I put out a sweet video this week. Talking about a new feature. It's not even on my YouTube yet. You don't even know. It's called New Improvements to Hot Reel and Live Preview for .NET MAUI and Visual Studio. They did it, Frank. You don't even have to debug your app. You just run without debugging.
I love running without debugging, but I also love debugging. We'll see.
.NET Watch, baby. And then I did a video called Starting .NET MAUI Development in 2025. I got it in right before the end of January, like right January 31st. Snuck it in. And then a whole bunch of, I have a lot of M4 stuff, virtualization stuff. I've been on this, M4 virtualization experimentation. I've been sharing my learnings along the way. I'm in. All right, that's going to do it. And so until next time, I'm James Montemagno.
And I'm Frank Kruger. Thanks for watching and listening.
Peace.